The wound that made you someone you're not. There's a moment in the life of every wounded child, a silent moment, almost invisible, a moment no one witnessed, no one photographed, no one will ever remember, but you remember. Maybe not consciously. Maybe your body remembers. Maybe your anxiety remembers. Maybe that critical voice in your head remembers. Carl Jung called this moment the primary wound, the instant a child discovers a devastating truth, the truth that being who they are isn't safe. And when that discovery happens, something dies inside them. What's born in its place is someone else, someone who should never have existed, someone hastily created, stitched together with fear, molded by the desperation of a child who only wanted one thing: love. If you're watching this video, you probably know this person very well. You see them every day in the mirror. You answer to their name. You live their life. But deep down, in some place you can barely access, there's a question that's never been answered. Who would I be if I hadn't needed to protect myself? Today we're going to talk about the most invisible and most devastating wound in the formation of human character. The wound that makes you someone you're not. This isn't self-help. This isn't abstract theory. This is depth psychology. This is Carl Jung explaining why you feel like you're living someone else's life. Why you feel like you lost something precious somewhere along the way. Why you feel like there's a true self buried beneath so many layers of adaptation that you don't even know how to access it anymore. But hold on, because before understanding the cure, you need to understand exactly how the wound was created. And that starts with a story. Emily was 4 years old when it happened. She doesn't remember the date, doesn't remember what she was wearing, doesn't remember if it was summer or winter, but she remembers the scene with a clarity that defies time. She was drawing, a simple drawing, like every 4-year-old makes. Colors mixed together, imprecise shapes, a crooked house with a giant sun in the corner. She was happy. That kind of pure happiness that only children can feel. That total absorption in the present moment, when the outside world ceases to exist and all that remains is the crayon gliding on the paper. When she finished, she ran to her mom. "Look what I did," she said, her eyes shining with anticipation. And her mom looked, not at the drawing, at Emily. Looked with that expression that Emily would learn to recognize in 1,000 different variations throughout her life. Ill-disguised irritation, existential weariness, chronic disappointment with her own existence, projected onto whoever was closest. "Not now. I'm busy." Die for words, but not now. I'm busy. Emily didn't collapse in that moment. Children are too resilient to collapse with a single rejection. But something changed. Something imperceptible. Something that neither she nor her mom would ever notice happening. Emily put away the drawing and kept trying. The next day, another drawing. Another "look what I did." Another variation of the same answer. After a week, she stopped showing her drawings. After a month, she stopped drawing when her mom was around. After 6 months, she stopped feeling that pure happiness when drawing. And at some point between the ages of 4 and 5, Emily did something that no child should ever need to do. She observed her mother with scientific attention. When did her mom smile? When Emily was quiet. When Emily helped. When Emily didn't ask for anything. When Emily was invisible. When did her mom get irritated? When Emily expressed needs. When Emily wanted attention. When Emily was herself. And with the implacable logic of a child's mind, desperate for love, Emily came to a devastating conclusion. I'm the problem. Not her mom's priorities, not her mom's weariness, not her mom's emotional unavailability. I am. And if I'm the problem, I need to change. Carl Jung has a term for what happened next. He called it the formation of the persona. Persona, in Latin, means mask. And that's exactly what Emily began to build. A mask carefully calibrated for a single purpose: to avoid rejection. Emily learned to be quiet, learned not to have visible needs, learned to guess her mom's mood before saying anything, learned to calibrate every facial expression, every tone of voice, every movement. She became an expert in emotional reading, not by choice, man, for survival. And the most tragic part of this story, it worked. Her mom started to accept Emily, or at least, started to accept the version of Emily that Emily had created. Emily received crumbs of approval, occasional smiles and fewer criticisms, less irritation, for a desperate child. This seemed like love, but Jung would say that it wasn't Emily being loved. It was the mask and the persona, and that's the first tragedy of the primary wound. The child learns that love isn't given to the true self. Love is given to the performance, and the more the persona receives approval, the more the true self is abandoned. Emily is 38 years old now. She doesn't draw anymore, right? Not because she doesn't have time, because she's completely lost access to that part of herself that once loved to draw. She's a lawyer, an extremely successful lawyer, known for her ability to anticipate problems, to read clients, to never lose her composure. The same skills she developed at 4 years old to survive are now her greatest professional qualities. Cruel irony. But at 38 years old, Emily is in a therapist's office for the first time in her life, not because she's unhappy, at least not consciously, no, because she's empty. A sensation she can't explain. A sensation that something fundamental is missing, that she's living a life that isn't hers, that there's an Emily somewhere, that she lost so long ago that she doesn't even know how to find anymore. The therapist asks something simple. What do you like to do? And Emily freezes. She can easily list what she should like, what successful people like, what her husband likes, what her colleagues like. But what does she like? Silence. She doesn't know. And in that moment, the therapist asks the question that collapses everything. When was the last time you felt completely yourself? Emily tries to remember, looks in her adolescence. Nothing. Looks in her 20s. Nothing. Looks in her 30s. Nothing. And then, from the depths of a memory she thought she had erased, an image emerges. A 4-year-old child, a drawing, a giant sun in the corner. And for the first time in 34 years, Emily cries, really cries. Not the controlled crying she learned to display when necessary. The real cry, the cry of the wounded child who lost something precious and never understood what. What happened to Emily? What happens to millions of people who recognize themselves in this story? Carl Jung explained this with an almost eerie precision. Every child is born with a true self, an authentic essence, genuine preferences, real emotions, legitimate needs. But this self needs mirroring to develop. Mirroring is what happens when a mother looks at her child, and the child sees in their mother's eyes that they exist, that they are seen, that they are accepted, that they are loved for who they are, not for what they do. When the mirroring is adequate, the true self strengthens. The child develops a solid foundation of identity. They know who they are. They trust their own perceptions. They can express needs without fear of annihilation. But when mirroring fails repeatedly, something different happens. The child perceives with a primitive but extremely precise intelligence that their true self is not welcome, that their real emotions cause rejection, that their genuine needs irritate, that being who they are is dangerous, and then, for pure survival, the child does something extraordinary and devastating at the same time. They create another person. Jung called this the mask, the social facade, the adapted self. It's the role we play, the face we present to the world, often to meet the expectations of others. But in cases of severe primary wound, the mask isn't just a facade for social situations. The mask becomes the identity. The true self is pushed so deep into the unconscious that the person forgets it exists. And that's the wound that makes you become who you are not. You're not pretending to be someone else. You genuinely believe that this mask is you. The mask has fused with the face, and the 4-year-old child who once created artwork with pure happiness, they're still there, frozen in time, waiting to be rescued. But you no longer know how to reach them. Here's the point that no one talks about. The person you became to survive probably functions very well. They get jobs, they maintain relationships, they're productive, they're respected. In fact, the more adapted the mask, the more successful they tend to be in the external world. That's the trap, because the world validates the mask all the time. You get promotions for being the mask. You get praise for being the mask. You get love for being the mask. And each external validation reinforces the idea that the mask is who you really are. Meanwhile, the true self continues to starve. Not literally, psychologically. And this starving self is what causes that unexplainable feeling of emptiness, that depression that doesn't make sense because your life is good, that anxiety that arises from nowhere, that chronic exhaustion that no vacation can cure. You're exhausted because you're living a life that demands constant energy to keep the mask in place. You're empty because the part of you that could feel fulfillment was abandoned decades ago. You're anxious because at some deep level you know you're living a lie. And the scariest part, you can't simply take off the mask. Because it's fused with the face. You no longer know who you are underneath it. Carl Jung used a specific term for this phenomenon. He called it identification with the mask. And it's one of the most dangerous psychological traps that exist. Because when you completely identify with your mask, any threat to the mask is felt as a threat to your existence. Criticisms of your behavior become criticisms of your soul. Failures in your performance become failures in your humanity. Rejection of any aspect of the mask becomes total rejection of who you are. And that's why people with deep primary wounds have so much difficulty with feedback, with vulnerability, with real intimacy, because real intimacy would require showing something beyond the mask. And if the mask is all you know, what exists beyond it? Fear. Fear of discovering that there's nothing there. Fear of discovering that the true self you abandoned at 4 years old really died. Fear of discovering that you're just a mask with no substance behind it. This fear is what kept Emily away from therapy for 34 years. And it's probably the same fear that keeps you avoiding deep questions about who you really are. But there's news that Carl Jung shared that changes everything. The true self does not die. It's immortal. It doesn't matter how many layers of adaptation you've put over it. It doesn't matter how many decades you've lived as the mask. It doesn't matter how much you believe it no longer exists. It's there, waiting. Frozen in time, yes. Atrophied, maybe. Scared, certainly. But alive. And the proof of this is exactly that feeling of emptiness you feel. If there wasn't a true self clamoring for attention, you wouldn't feel that something is missing. If you were just masked to the core, you'd be satisfied with external success. The fact that you feel like you're living someone else's life is proof that there's another person inside you who wants to live. Hold on to that, because we're going to come back to that point. Before continuing, we need to understand something crucial. The wound is not the child's fault, but the healing is the responsibility of the adult. This means that you need to do something that your inner child could never do. You need to choose consciously to find the true self that was abandoned. And that's terribly scary. Because it means questioning everything you've built. It means admitting that the life you've created may not be your real life. It means accepting that the choices you've made may have been choices of the mask, not the self. It means looking at your relationships and asking if you're loved for who you are or for the mask you wear. It means asking if the work you do is something the true self would choose. It means asking if the people around you even know you for real. These questions are devastating. And that's why most people avoid asking them. It's easier to keep the mask on. It's safer to continue being who you learned to be. It's less painful to believe that the feeling of emptiness is just tiredness or stress or any other convenient explanation. But Jung had a serious warning about this path. He said that the second half of life requires the rescue of what was lost in the first half. If you've spent the first 20, 30, 40 years building a mask to survive, there comes a point when the bill comes due, and it arrives in different forms. For some, it's a midlife crisis that seems unexplainable. For others, it's a depression that medication can't cure. For others, it's a marriage that crumbles because real intimacy has become impossible. For still others, it's a growing sense of irrelevance, as if life is passing you by and you're watching from the outside. These crises aren't problems. Carl Jung would say they're solutions, the true self, after decades of silence, is screaming. And the scream comes out in the only way it knows how, through the symptom. Let me tell you about Michael. Michael was 45 years old when he arrived in therapy. He didn't come willingly. He came because his wife threatened divorce if he didn't seek help. The reason? Michael was emotionally unavailable. He was physically present, paid the bills, went to his children's school events, fulfilled all the obligations of a husband and father, but he wasn't really there. His wife described it with a phrase that destroyed him. "I feel more alone married to you than when I was single." Michael didn't understand. He did everything right. He was a good husband by objective standards. What more did she want? Intimacy, a vulnerability, access to the real Michael, not the character he played, the mask he wore. And by mask, I mean the persona, the role we present to the world. But here was the problem. Michael no longer knew who the real Michael was. His story was different from Emily's, but the dynamics were the same. Michael was the son of a military father, rigid, disciplined, emotionally closed off. In Michael's house, emotions were weakness. Crying was unthinkable. Expressing fear was shameful. Demonstrating vulnerability was a flaw in character. His father's love was entirely conditional, based on performance and on results, on toughness. And Michael learned quickly. He suffocated his emotions, built armor, became strong, resilient, unwavering, and his father finally approved of him, or at least approved of the version of Michael that Michael had created. This version was extremely successful. Michael became an engineer, then a manager, then a director. His ability to remain calm under pressure was legendary. His ability to make tough decisions without flinching was admired by everyone. He never lost his composure, never showed weakness, never needed anyone. Perfect. Except he was completely alone inside himself, and his wife was feeling it. She didn't want a perfect provider. She wanted a human being, and the human being behind the armor had been locked in a dungeon at age 7 and had never been released. Carl Jung spoke extensively about how parents mold the psyche of their children in ways that go far beyond the obvious. It's not just what parents say, it's what they reward, what they punish, what they ignore. Michael's father never told him not to cry. He didn't need to. He simply looked with contempt when Michael showed vulnerability, and looked with approval when Michael hid it. For a child, that's clear instruction. Show emotions and lose love. Hide emotions and gain love. The choice is obvious and tragic. In therapy, Michael was asked to do a simple exercise. Describe the last time he cried. He thought for a long time. At his father's funeral, 5 years ago. No, he didn't cry. Stayed strong for the family. When his children were born, no. He was too busy making sure everything worked at the hospital. When he received his best friend's cancer diagnosis, no. He was focused on being the support his friend needed. Michael realized, at that moment, that he didn't remember ever crying as an adult. Never. And then the therapist asked something that opened a crater. And when you were a child? What came wasn't a memory. It was a physical sensation. Tightness in his chest, throat closing, eyes burning. Michael's body remembered something that his mind had forgotten. And then, at 45 years old, for the first time in nearly 4 decades, Michael cried, not for his wife, not for his marriage, not for any present situation. He cried for the 7-year-old boy who had to kill a part of himself to survive. And that cry was the first step toward finding who he really was. Do you see the pattern? Emily suppressed her needs for expression and joy. Michael suppressed his emotions and vulnerability, but both did the same fundamental thing. They abandoned essential parts of themselves to gain conditional love. And that abandonment created the primary wound. The primary wound isn't what the parents did. The primary wound is what the child did to adapt to what the parents did. The primary wound is the part of you that you locked in the basement of your psyche because it wasn't welcome. And that locked part doesn't disappear. It transforms into shadow. Carl Jung had much to say about the shadow. The shadow is everything we repress, everything we hide, everything we deny in ourselves. And here's the irony. The more you repress something and the more power you give to that something. The creativity that Emily repressed, it transformed into a fierce criticism against anyone creative that Emily encountered. Emily couldn't stand artists, thought they were irresponsible, thought they were wasting time, thought they should do something useful with their lives. Classic projection. The part of Emily that wanted to be an artist was pushed into the shadow. And from there, it attacked anyone who dared to live what Emily couldn't live. The emotions that Michael repressed, they transformed into contempt for anyone emotional. Michael thought men who cried were weak, thought that showing vulnerability was manipulation, thought emotional people were childish, classic projection. The part of Michael that needed to cry was pushed into the shadow. And from there, it attacked anyone who dared to feel what Michael couldn't feel. This is one of the clearest signs that you've abandoned parts of yourself. When you feel unexplainable irritation or intense contempt for specific characteristics in other people, ask if those characteristics are exactly what you were forced to suppress. The intensity of your reaction is proportional to the intensity of the repression. But there's an even deeper problem. When you abandon parts of yourself for long enough, you forget they exist. You no longer know what you want, because the part of you that wanted things has been silenced. You no longer know what you feel, because the part of you that felt was silenced. You no longer know who you are, because your true self has been buried so deep, you've lost the map. And this amnesia about yourself is the real price of the primary wound. It's not just the pain your parents caused, it's the disconnection from yourself that you created as a response to that pain. So, how do you find your way back? How do you rescue the 4-year-old who stopped drawing? The 7-year-old who stopped crying? The part of you that was abandoned before you even had conscious memories? The first thing is brutal. You need to feel the pain, not think about the pain, feel it. Because the wound isn't in your mind, it's in your body, it's in your emotions, it's in the sensations that you've avoided for decades. When Emily finally cried in the therapist's office, she wasn't processing information. She was unfreezing something that had been frozen at age 4. When Ryan finally wept, he wasn't having an intellectual insight. He was unlocking a door that had been bolted shut at age 7. Reason alone does not heal childhood wounds. You can't think your way out of this. You need to feel your way into it. And that's exactly what every wounded adult has spent their life avoiding. Feeling. The second thing is equally challenging. You need to question who you think you are, not destroy, not reject. Question. Is this what I really like? Or is it what I learned to like in order to be accepted? Is this job I do my own choice? Or is it the choice of my mask? Remember, Carl Jung used the term persona to describe the mask we wear in public, the role we play to fit into society. Are these relationships I have with people who really know me, or with people who know my mask? Are these beliefs I hold about the world my own? Or are they beliefs I absorbed to fit in? These questions are disturbing because the answers could change everything. You might discover that your marriage is with someone who fell in love with the mask, not with you. You might discover that your entire career was built by the mask. You might discover that the friends you have don't know who you really are. And then what? Then you rebuild. This is the part that Carl Jung called individuation. Individuation isn't becoming someone else. It's becoming yourself for the first time. It's a process of integration, of bringing back the abandoned parts, of reconnecting with the true self that was lost, of allowing the mask to become more flexible, more transparent, until it can eventually be removed without fear. This doesn't happen overnight. Emily spent 2 years in therapy before she could draw again. Syed Ryan spent over a year before he could cry in front of his wife without feeling shame. The primary wound took years to create. Healing also takes time, but each step is a rescue. Each moment of real vulnerability is a reconquest of lost territory. Each time you allow yourself to want something that the mask wouldn't approve of, you're resurrecting a part of you that was murdered. And here's the most beautiful paradox of this journey. When you start to integrate the true self, the mask doesn't disappear, it transforms. Instead of being a rigid prison that you use to survive, it becomes a flexible tool that you choose to use when appropriate. You can still be professional at work, but now you choose to be professional, instead of being incapable of being anything else. You can still be strong when necessary, but now you can choose to be strong, instead of being incapable of being vulnerable. The difference is freedom. The mask stops being a prison and becomes a wardrobe. You wear it when it makes sense, and you remove it when it doesn't. This flexibility is the sign of psychological health, Carl Jung would say. You don't need to destroy the mask. You need to stop being possessed by it. For those of you watching this and recognizing your own story, I know it hurts. I know part of you wants to close this video and pretend you didn't see it. Wants to return to the safety of the mask. Wants to believe that the emptiness you feel is just tiredness. I understand. The mask has worked for decades. It protected you. It helped you survive. But it also imprisoned you. And at some point, the price of the prison becomes greater than the price of freedom. If this video touched something in you, if it brought up memories you thought you had forgotten, if it created an uncomfortable but true sense of recognition, I need to ask you something. Consider hitting the super thanks button down below. Not because you have to, but because this channel exists to bring this kind of content that no one else is bringing. Depth psychology. Real Carl Jung. Wounds that society prefers to ignore. Every contribution helps keep this work alive, helps to continue producing material that can change lives. I'm not asking you to finance entertainment. I'm asking you to invest in transformation. If this video planted a seed of change in you, consider watering that seed. And if you can't contribute financially, that's okay. Sharing also helps. Send it to someone who needs to hear this. Either way, thank you for being here. Back to what matters. The primary wound that made you become who you are not doesn't need to define the rest of your life. You were wounded as a child, that's true. You created a mask to survive. That's also true. You've lived years, maybe decades, being someone who isn't really you. That's tragic but true. But the story isn't over. The true self is still there, frozen, scared, waiting, and it can be rescued. The first step is the simplest, and the most difficult at the same time. Admitting that the mask exists, admitting that you don't know who you are under it, admitting that the life you've built may have been built by the mask, not by the self. This requires a courage that most people don't have, because it's easier to keep pretending. It's safer, and it's less painful in the short term. But Carl Jung reminded us that what you avoid doesn't disappear. What you avoid grows. And one day, the bill comes due. But if you recognized your story in this video, you've already taken the first step. Recognition is the beginning. The next step is to seek help. A therapist who understands these dynamics, a professional who can guide you through the unknown territory of your own interior. This isn't weakness. It's the greatest demonstration of strength that exists, because it takes courage to look at the parts of yourself that you've spent your life hiding. It takes real courage to question everything you've built. It takes strength to admit that you need help. Emily is 42 years old now. She's still a lawyer, still quite successful. But something has shifted. She's drawing again. Not professionally, not to show anyone, just for herself. And when she draws, something within her reconnects with that 4-year-old girl who felt abandoned so long ago. She's rescuing the true Emily, one stroke of the pencil at a time. Ralph is 48 years old now. He's still strong, still competent, still respected at work. But something has changed. He can cry now, in front of his wife, in front of his children, in front of himself. And each tear is like a piece of that 7-year-old boy being brought back into the light. His wife recently said that she finally feels like she truly knows her husband. After 20 years of marriage, they're really starting to know each other. This is the promise of individuation. It's not that you'll become someone else. It's that you'll finally become yourself, the person you would have been if the primary wound hadn't happened. The person who's still in there, waiting, frozen in time. You can rescue them. You can bring them back. You can finally live the life that's truly yours. But this requires one thing. You need to have the courage to look at the primary wound. You need to have the strength to feel the pain you've been avoiding. You need the bravery to question who you think you are. And then, only then, can you begin to discover who you really are. Remember the question I asked at the beginning. Who would you be if you hadn't needed to protect yourself? That question doesn't have a ready-made answer. It has a journey. And the journey begins when you decide that the cost of not being yourself has finally become unbearable. When you decide that the safety of the mask, the protective facade we show the world, is no longer worth the price of the prison it creates. When you decide that it's time to find the wounded child you abandoned, this decision only you can make. No one can make it for you. But I hope that this video has planted a seed of doubt about who you think you are, a seed of curiosity about who you could be, a seed of hope that the true self is still there, waiting to be found, because it is, and it's waiting for you. Carl Jung once said that the greatest tragedy of life is what dies inside of us while we are still alive. But he also said that what was lost can be found. What was abandoned can be rescued. What was wounded can be healed. It's not easy. It's not quick. It's not painless. But it is possible. And that possibility is what makes human life extraordinary. You were wounded, but you are not your wound. You created a mask, but you are not your mask. You are something much deeper. You are the true self that still waits, patiently, to finally be lived. The question is only one. When will you begin to look for it?